It is May of 1945, and the war in Europe is technically over, but the dying has not stopped yet. Deep in the forests of Austria, near a place called Lambach, the air smells like burning rubber and rotting meat, and something else that no human being should ever have to smell. The roads are muddy and clogged with the debris of a broken German army. In the distance, you can hear the rumble of engines. It is not the high-pitched whine of German Panthers. It is the low, throat-rattling growl of American M4 Sherman tanks. These tanks are dirty. They are covered in mud and sandbags and logs to stop Panzerfaust rockets. They have white stars painted on the sides, but the men inside them do not look like the soldiers in the newsreels back home. They do not look like the soldiers on the recruiting posters in Iowa or New York. The commander in the lead tank pops the hatch and looks out at the horror in front of him. He is a black man. The men behind him, in the other tanks, are black men. And in this specific moment, in the spring of 1945, they are about to come face to face with the worst crime in human history. They are about to liberate the Gunskirchen Lager concentration camp. This moment right here is the most important moment in the history of American liberty. We are coming up on our 250th birthday as a nation. We are going to celebrate 1776. We are going to talk about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and the idea that all men are created equal. But we all know that in 1776, that was just words on a piece of paper. It was a promise that America made but did not keep. It was a check that bounced for a lot of people for a long time. But on this day, in Austria, in 1945, the 764th Tank Battalion finally cashed that check. They proved that the fiery spirit of America was stronger than the laws of America. To understand why this moment matters so much, you have to understand who these men were. The army called them the 761st Tank Battalion. They called themselves the Black Panthers long before that name meant anything political. They were the first African-American armored unit to see combat in World War II, but the army did not want them. You have to remember what America was like in the 1940s. It was not just that they had to sit in the back of the bus. It was that the military itself believed they were not smart enough to operate tanks. The generals in Washington wrote reports saying that black men did not have the reflexes or the intelligence to handle modern machinery. They said they would run away when the shooting started. They were wrong. The men of the 764th were not drafted. Most of them enlisted. They signed up to fight for a country that did not let them eat in the same diners as the German prisoners of war they would later capture. Think about that for a second. A black soldier in training in Louisiana or Texas could see a captured Nazi sitting in a restaurant eating a meal while he had to stand outside and eat a sandwich in the dust. And yet, he still put on the uniform. He still learned how to drive that Sherman tank. He still learned how to load the 76mm gun. They trained for 2 years because the army could not decide what to do with them. They were too good to disband. But the generals were too racist to deploy them. They sat in Camp Claiborne and Camp Hood, and they waited. They dealt with local sheriffs who arrested them for no reason. They dealt with bus drivers who shot at them. There is a famous story about a young lieutenant in the unit named Jackie Robinson who refused to move to the back of a bus on the base. He got court-martialed for it and eventually left the unit. But that was the spirit of these men. They were fighting 2 wars. They called it the Double V, victory over fascism abroad and victory over racism at home. Finally, in late 1944, General George Patton needed tanks. Patton did not care about color as much as he cared about killing Germans. He was losing tanks and men at a terrifying rate in France, and he sent for the 764th. When they arrived, he stood on top of a half-track and he looked them in the eye. He had a high, squeaky voice, but he knew how to talk to soldiers. He told them that he did not care what color they were, as long as they went up there and killed those Krauts. He told them that everyone had their eyes on them, and they could not afford to mess up. He put the weight of the entire race on their shoulders. And they carried it. They went into combat in November 1944, and they did not stop for 183 days. That is a number you should remember. Most units get pulled off the line after a few weeks to rest and repair. The 764th stayed on the line for 6 months straight. They fought through the mud of Lorraine in France. They fought through the freezing snow of the Battle of the Bulge. They cracked the Siegfried Line, which was the wall of concrete and steel that protected Germany. They were the tip of the spear. There was a sergeant named Reuben Rivers. He was a quiet man from Oklahoma. During a battle in November, his tank hit a mine and his leg was slashed open to the bone. The medics told him he had to go back. The captain told him he had to go back. Reuben Rivers said no. He said that if he left his tank, his men would be one tank short. He climbed back into another tank with his leg rotting and infection setting in. For 3 days he fought like that. He led the charge against German anti-tank guns. He destroyed positions that had pinned down the entire division. Eventually, a German shell hit his turret and killed him. He fought until he literally fell apart. He won the Medal of Honor, but the government did not give it to him until 1997. That is how hard these men had to work to prove they were Americans. But the real story is not about the fighting. It is about what happened at the end. It is about what happened at the end. It is about that day in May of 1945. The 764th had pushed all the Vorich way into Austria. They were chasing the remnants of the SS. The German army was collapsing and running into the woods. The Black Panthers were tired. They had lost almost half their original men. Their tanks were held together with wire and prayers. They were hard men now. They had seen their friends blown apart. They had killed hundreds of enemy soldiers. They were not naive boys anymore. Then they got the order to check out a complex of buildings near the town of Lambach. The map said it was a supply depot, or maybe a prisoner camp. They did not know. They rolled their tanks down the Soda, narrow road through the pine trees. As they got closer, the smell hit them. Veterans who were there said you could smell it from miles away. It was a smell of death so thick you could taste it. When the lead tanks broke through the fence, they saw things that defied description. This was Gunskirchen Lager. It was a sub-camp of the Mauthausen complex. It was a place where the Nazis sent Hungarian Jews to die. There were almost 20,000 people crammed into a space meant for a few hundred. They were skeletons wrapped in skin. They were lying in the mud. They were crawling on, hands and knees, because they were too weak to stand. There were bodies stacked up like firewood against the barracks walls. Now, pause and think about this image. Here are the soldiers of the 764th. They are black men from the American South and the northern cities. They grew up in a country that told them they were subhuman. They grew up in a country that told them they were ugly and stupid and dangerous. They knew what it felt like to be looked at with hate. They knew what it felt like to be treated like an animal. And now, they were looking at the victims of the Holocaust. They were looking at Jewish people who had been stripped of their humanity by a government that considered them a virus. The Nazis had a racial theory, just like the segregationists in America had a racial theory. The Nazis believed in a master race, and here were the soldiers who were supposed to be the inferior race, arriving as the conquerors to destroy the master race. It was a collision of history that you could not write in a movie script because nobody would believe it. The survivors in the camp did not know who these soldiers were. They had never seen black men before. Some of them thought they were angels. Some of them were afraid, but then the hatch opened and a black soldier climbed out. He did not shoot. He did not shout. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ration bar. He reached into his tank and pulled out a canteen of water. One of the survivors was a man named Saul. He was just a teenager then. He weighed maybe 60 pounds. He later said that when he saw that American tank, he thought he was hallucinating. But then the soldier picked him up. The soldier was crying. You have to understand that these battle-hardened tank crews, who had killed without mercy for 6 months, broke down and wept. They saw themselves in those prisoners. They saw the ultimate end of where hatred leads. Captain John Long was one of the officers. He looked at the starving people and he got mad. He got a kind of anger that stays with you forever. He ordered his men to give everything they had. They gave their food. They gave their blankets. They gave their medical supplies. They started carrying people to the trucks. They touched them. That is the key. The Nazis would not touch the Jews because they thought they were unclean. The Americans back home would not touch the black soldiers because they thought they were unclean. But here in this hellhole in Austria, the black soldiers touched the Jewish survivors. They held them. They carried them to safety. This is the moment. This is the specific second in 1945 where America earned its 250th birthday. Because up until that moment, the American idea was a lie. It was a beautiful lie, but it was a lie. We said all men are free, but we owned slaves. We said all men are equal, but we had Jim Crow. We fought for freedom in Europe while we had lynching at home. But in that camp, the circle closed. The men who were the victims of American prejudice became the agents of American liberty. They took the promise of the Declaration of Independence and they exported it to the darkest place on earth. They did not do it because the government told them to. The government did not even want them there. They did it because they were Americans. They defined what being an American was better than the politicians in Washington did. Being an American is not about your bloodline or your skin color or where your grandfather was born. It is about what you do when you are standing in front of a concentration camp gate. It is about whether you have the strength to smash that gate down and the compassion to pick up the person on the other side. The 761st Tank Battalion proved that the software of America works, even if the hardware is broken. The hardware of the country was segregated and racist and flawed, but the software, the idea of liberty and justice, was running perfectly in the hearts of those men in those tanks. After the war, they came home. There were no parades for them. They got off the ships and they had to go back to the colored waiting rooms. They had to go back to being called boy. Many of them never talked about what they saw. It was too painful. They just went to work in factories and post offices and auto shops. They raised their families. They built the middle class. They became the quiet backbone of the nation. But we know now what they did. We know that, on that day in May, they saved the world. They saved it from Hitler, yes. But they also saved America from itself. They showed us what we are supposed to be. They showed us that a patriot is not the person who waves the flag the hardest. A patriot is the person who forces the country to live up to its own words. So when we get to July 4th, 2026, and we see the fireworks and we hear the speeches about 250 years of freedom, I want you to think about the 761st. I want you to think about that muddy road in Austria. I want you to think about the black face looking into the Jewish face, and the connection that was made there. That was the birthday. That was when the United States of America finally grew up. That was when we proved that we were worth saving. We are still working on it. We are still trying to get it right. But we have a map now. We have a guide. We just have to look at the tracks of those Sherman tanks and follow where they lead. They lead toward a country where you are judged by the content of your character and not the color of your skin. It is a long road. It is a hard road. But the Black Panthers drove it first, and because they drove it, we can drive it too.